will be number 79, This Is My Father's World. Now we will sing number 70, Stand Up for Jesus.
Stand up for Jesus, ye soldiers of the cross. Lift high his royal banner, it must not suffer loss. From victory unto victory, his army shall he lead, till every foe is vanquished, and Christ is Lord indeed. Stand up for Jesus, the trumpet call obey, for to the mighty conflict in this his glorious day. Ye that are his now serve him against outnumbered foes. Let courage rise with danger, and strength to strength oppose. Stand up for Jesus, stand in his strength alone. The arm of flesh shall fail, ye dare not trust your own. Put on the gospel armor, and marching unto prayer, where duty calls or danger, be never wanting there. Stand up for Jesus, the strife will not be long. This day the noise of battle, the next the victor's song. To him that overcometh, a crown of life shall be. He with the King of glory shall reign eternally.
And our last song will be the theme song, and we would like to ask everyone who can't, please stand.
You ask me why I believe like I do, why I'm so convinced that the Bible is true. I'm here to tell you it's only because I've come through enough to see what faith does. Faith sees the invisible, believes the impossible, receives the incredible. No matter what was, faith moves the unmovable, proves the unprovable. For anyone willing to trust, believe and you'll see what faith does. If there's a mountain that stands in your way, from all you can see it be there to stay. God said with the faith of a small mustard seed, that mountain will move. Believe and you'll see. Faith sees the invisible, believes the impossible, receives the incredible. No matter what it was, faith moves the unmovable, proves the unprovable. For anyone willing to trust, believe and you'll see what faith does. Faith sees the invisible, believes the impossible, receives the incredible. No matter what it was, faith moves the unmovable, proves the unprovable. For anyone willing to trust, believe and you'll see what faith does. Believe and you'll see what faith does.
I wanted to apologize. Today we said we were going to have a craft, but instead we had a wonderful orchestra practice. And so I hope that everybody's pleased with that, and that will be the Father's Day gift. The kids had a lot of fun practicing their instruments and learning bells, and so it was a treat. A couple of announcements. We would like for the kids to be able to settle down by 10 o'clock. We should not hear any kids walking around or coming in and out. I know that last night was hard because people were coming in late and they were getting situated. But yes, at the inn and at the dorms, we would like for the quiet time is at 10 o'clock. So if we can get the kids to bed even before that. I know a lot of families, their bedtime is even earlier than that. So the earlier, the better.
Thanks. Okay, tonight, special music will be by the Amparo family. Prayer will be by Richard Disson. And also the speakers tonight will be Paul and Hannah Raynes and Caleb. And the title will be Log Cabins, Snapchat, and the Super Bowl.
Good evening. I know for me it's been a pleasure being here thus far, and I hope that as we continue with these meetings that God would truly bless us. You know, just to have this time as a family is a blessing. So if we can all kneel as we come before the Lord in prayer. Heavenly Father, we recognize that this is a special time. And we pray, dear Lord, that you'll help us to be able to walk away from this mountain, realizing what it is that you want us to do for you, that we'll be able not only individually but as a family unit truly represent you, dear Lord, that others may see Christ in us, the hope of glory. We ask in a special way that you'll be with the speakers, that your Holy Spirit will anoint them, that their words may bring life to our hearts, that we may have receptive hearts, we pray. In Jesus' name, amen.
Good evening. Thank you for the beautiful music. Are you going to that festival that they were talking about earlier? Because if going to be a week of that, that would be really good. We'd all be very relaxed and, you know. Before we get into the message tonight, just wanted to add a couple of things on. Each of you who registered, hopefully you all registered, you'll get a little flash drive in your bag. You probably already got it. On that flash drive is all the messages from the National Family Retreat. All the messages that you're hearing here. Well, no, there's a few that you're hearing here that weren't at National Family Retreat. But the video and the audio is all on there. And there's all kinds of stuff on there, actually, that you can go and look at. So I know it's real little, but its size does not indicate its value. If you were to buy that in DVDs, you'd probably have to have a briefcase, and you pay a couple $100 for it. So it's just a simple package. Put it in your computer, or if you've got a TV that's got a USB port, you can put it in there. You probably won't know how to watch it, but if you give it to the kids, they'll probably figure it out. And, before you know it, you'll be watching something. Hopefully what's on the flash drive. Also, this is a bit of a plug for Weimar. I meant to bring that card up. They are video live streaming all of the messages. Hello, wifey. She's watching. So I'll explain that in a minute. Oh, yeah, here it is. So if you've got friends that you think, man, they should be here, well, you can get them here via their computer. youtube.com/Weimar Church Media. youtube.com/Weimar Church Media. If you text that to your friends, then we can have twice as many people here and still be able to sit near the front. So some of you know, and some of you don't know that I'm not a single dad. I have a wife. And she has traveled with us all over the country, all over the world, actually, for since 2005, the last 13 years. And she's about wore out, bless her heart. We found out last year that she has Lyme disease. Lyme disease isn't so bad, but some of the co-infections that she has that go with that are pretty bad. And it stems back from our time in the mission field in Africa, before we had children. So for any of you know that the longer you've had it, the more embedded it is and the harder it is to to deal with. So in the process of dealing with it, it's pretty rough for her. She's nauseous most of the time. She lacks a lot of energy. She's had a ton of other complications as well. She lost a huge amount of her hearing as part of the Lyme disease. So that just, she lost her coordination. Being in a big crowd isn't very, it's difficult for her already, but without your hearing and your coordination, it's really difficult. So the doctor said, if we're going to get serious about fixing you can't really travel for all of this year and probably next year as well. So, but she misses you all terribly. She says to me, I talked to her on WhatsApp in between the meetings, and many of you have said, give our love to Carolyn. And I said, I can't remember the lady's name, but she said to send you her love. And she says, well, send my love back. And I said, well, if I can find her, I will. So she's watching. You can't see her. We should actually live stream her watching us. She wouldn't like that. No, she wouldn't like that. She's probably in her pajamas by now and ready for bed. Anyway, I did this at National Family Retreat. I'll do it again here. If you would like to send her a little email or note of encouragement, her email address is on the RI website, carolyn@restoration-international.org. I would give you a phone number, but she won't answer. So that won't work. She does do phone appointments, but she doesn't just take calls at any time of the day. So if you want to chat to her, email her and set something up. She does great one-on-ones. She just can't deal with the crowd right now. So prayers appreciated. Okay. Log cabins, Snapchat, and the Super Bowl. What on earth is this about? Anybody any ideas? No? Okay, that's good. That means you haven't put your flash drive in and had a little sneak peek. It's actually going to be a country living message. Oh, wow. Country living messages in California are like chocolate teapots. It's not the most exciting thing to talk about because, anyway, let's move on. Now, my wife wrote most of this message and then bailed on us. So it's gonna feel like I'm doing a lot of the talking because I'm doing her part and her part. Hannah and Caleb are going to speak, just not for a little while. So just keep smiling. So country living, it's kind of got distorted over the last 100 years. Not necessarily anybody's fault, but what was country back then and what you got when you went to the country is totally different today. Country living is a change of heart. It's a whole different way of living. And back 100 years ago, most people were living in the country. Now the vast majority of people live in the cities and suburbia, or just a little way from the metropolis. So country living, or real country living, is not sitting in your log cabin on your 20 acres, spending hours on social media. Or hours watching TV. I mean, that wasn't possible, was it, years ago? If you were in the country, you were in the country. There was hardly anybody came to see you because they didn't want to walk the 3 miles up your driveway. But now you can be in the country and be in the city at the same time. It's kind of crazy how it's changed. So it's possible now to do city living from the country. It's possible to work from home. It's possible to shop from home. And it's possible to live in the city whilst being on your 20 acres in the middle of nowhere. Country living was supposed to be a barrier to protect us from worldly influences. But now, because of things like Wi-Fi, you ever heard of that? Yeah, everybody's heard of Wi-Fi. 4G, LTE, cables, satellites. Now your body can be in the wilderness and your brain can be in Sodom at the same time. And, that wasn't a thing years ago. The Garden of Eden, if you ever thought about this, it's kind of funny to think of it, but there was no self-service in the Garden of Eden. There were no Wi-Fi networks. I mean, you go on your phone and there's nothing, just empty. Can't even try and guess at one password. There's just not even any to be seen. You're laughing because you've tried that too. Country living was intended to be a place where we could grow close to God, away from the distractions and the influences that Satan is generating to take us in the other direction. Life in the country was supposed to be very different. So here we go with log cabins, Snapchat, and the Super Bowl. Well, actually, we're not going to talk about Snapchat or the Super Bowl, or log cabins for that matter. It's just the contrast between how we can live in a log cabin but still be on social media, which is Snapchat, or Super Bowl, which is TV. So now I'm Carolyn. It's Carolyn's part. I'll try and speak with a high voice. That might, no, okay, I won't. Carolyn grew up, Carolyn and I are very different. Carolyn grew up in a village, just a little English village. In fact, her father never left that village. He was born there, he worked there, and he died there. They went on vacation to Northern Ireland one time. That was about 200 miles away. That was as far as he ever went. And very happy. That would be considered kind of backward today, wouldn't it? But he was very fulfilled. There wasn't artificial excitement. It was a real walk with God. For myself, I grew up in the city as a non-Christian. I went places with my friends and did things that I wouldn't want any of you guys to do. So we're very different, Carolyn and I. Isaiah chapter 30 and verse 21 says, "This is the way, walk ye in it, when you turn to the right hand and when you turn to the left." You see, God wants to have access to our minds, yes? He wants to teach us through his word, but then he wants to remind us of his word and speak to us through his still small voice. Is that easy to do when you're just bombarded with noise and activity and stuff all around you? No, it's not. Is it much easier to do that when you're walking through the woods here at Weimar and it's just you and the birds and there's nothing else? Yes. How about this? This is Country Living, section 7. The time has come. It's like 150 years ago, but apply it now. The time has come when, as God opens the way, families should move out of the cities. Is this complicated? Well, it's complicated to do. It's not complicated to hear. The children should be taken into the country. The parents should get as suitable a place as their means will allow. Though the dwelling may be small, yet there should be land in connection with it that may be cultivated. So what's more important, the garden or the house, according to this quote? Yeah, you can have a tiny house, but you better have a big garden. That's how I read that. Is that the common trend? No, well, tiny houses are making a bit of a comeback, but generally that's not the trend. How about this? It's the same section. It's just a few pages on. God will help his people find such places outside the cities. That's good. That is a promise. God will help. I remember when Karen and I were looking for a country home, that we took that like we are resting everything we're doing on that. God will help. And it actually says God will help his people. One other place it said God will help families. And when we were struggling to find a country home, somebody actually said to us, the reason you're struggling is it's because it says God will help families and you don't have any children yet. So God isn't helping you. And we fell for it. But then we found this one, which says the same thing, but it says God will help his people. Doesn't mention anything about families. So you can claim that promise, whether you're single or married without children. If you're married without children, you're still a family. The family starts at the altar there. So that was the promise, but you know, most promises have a condition with them, don't they? And this is what comes in I don't know if it's the next line or next paragraph. Many will have to labor earnestly to open the way. So do you think country living is easy? You think you just, let's put our house on the market and move to the country. You know, and you open the newspaper or, you know, go on Craigslist or Facebook or whatever. Oh, sweetheart, here's a couple we could go and look at tomorrow. And you just go and, yeah, that's good. Let's just move out. Is it that easy? No. Carolyn and I spent a long time in England looking for a country home. We cried. We wept. We pulled our hair out. We drew lots even at one point. I mean, don't do that. That's not really the right thing to do. But in the last 25 years, Karen and I have moved 5 times to different country homes. That's my fault. We should have stayed put. But there you go. We lived 6 years in a travel trailer. We didn't have children, granted. But it wasn't an American travel trailer. It was a British travel trailer. 157 square feet. 19 feet long, 7 foot 1 inches wide. For 6 years, whilst we were saving money to be able to move to the country. When we moved out of that trailer, we moved into a bigger trailer. Whilst we renovated a 100-year-old Irish cottage that didn't have any windows or a door, that had actually been home to cows for the last few years. That's what we bought. We were over the moon with it. We thought it was a big upgrade from the trailer. But we had to renovate it. Well, we had to get the stuff out, first of all, and then work on renovating it. After we renovated that cottage there in Ireland, and I can do this. Oh, no, okay. We bought it for £10,000. 10,000 British pounds. That would be about 15,000 US dollars. This was ways back, before children. And we put money into it to renovate it. And then when we got the call to come and join Restoration International here, it meant leaving Ireland. Our cottage was finished at this point. We had 2 children. And so we called the realtor who sold us the place, and he said, if you've done nothing to it, if it's just exactly the same as the day I sold it to you, I can sell it in a day for 30,000. Because the market had boomed. We didn't know. I mean, we're just out in the country, you know, raising 2 rascals and just trying to survive and get a business going. But we'd done quite a bit to it. So we sold it for 89, 4 years later. That's pretty good going, huh? That's not why we did it. All we did was work hard, but God blessed us. So we came over to the US and we bought just a regular country home on 5 acres, just 20 minutes from town, and we had a big mortgage. I'm not against mortgages, but I am against eking out the mortgage for years and years and years. You need to get that paid off as quick as possible, because at some point that's going to be a problem. So anyway, after a few years there, we decided, you know, this mortgage is just getting us down. So we sold the house. Again, the market was still going up. We sold the house, and we made a good profit on it. We cleared off the mortgage. So we're debt-free. We haven't got a house, but we're debt-free. And we bought some land, and we built a smaller home on that land. And if you go to the Restoration International website, restoration-international.org, and you go onto the audio tab at the top, you will find that there's 200 hours of sermons on there. Everything and anything that the Waters and Raynes have ever preached about, it's all there for free. You can stream it, you can download it, you can do whatever you want with it. Copy it and give it to your friends. It's all there. And our whole testimony, Karen and I spent an hour and 20 minutes just on this section. So if you want more detail, you can go there. But we Anyway, we ended up selling that home that we built after 7 years, and we moved and lived in a manufactured home off-grid in Arizona. So you're starting to get a bit of the diversity. We renovated a home in Europe. We bought a regular home in Montana. We built a home from scratch in the woods. We had a contractor do the work, but, I was general contractor. We lived in a triple-wide manufactured home off-grid in Arizona. Now we live in a log cabin in Montana. So we've done it all. So if you want some ideas of what works and what doesn't work, we can tell you. Okay, Hannah's going to share some of her experiences growing up in the country.
As we were preparing this message, Caleb and I were like, well, we can talk about the blessings of being in the country, but we've never actually made the decision ourselves to move our family to the country because we're not at that point in life. But we have spent all of our growing up years in the country, which has been a huge blessing. And as we were, thinking about different benefits of the country, some that really stood out to my mind is that when you live in the country, you can go out and spend time with God in a quiet place in nature where you can either pray out loud or just sit and think. And when you live in downtown, you can't just do that. You have to drive somewhere. And, when you're 15 or 12 years old, you can't just drive somewhere. And so I'm really thankful that throughout all of my growing up years, I could go and I could walk around our house. I could, go out in nature. I could pray. I could spend that time with God in an environment that's even more conducive to that than just being inside the house. And I think that's such a good thing to be able to grow up, being able to just spend time outside. And, Caleb and I would play outside. We had all kinds of playhouses in the woods and things like that, where that's what we were doing when we were younger instead of, the video games which I wasn't meaning that we did that when we were younger and now we do video games now. But I mean, as opposed to a lot of what's easy to have happen if you don't have an outside to go to. Another good thing about being in the country is it puts a natural barrier between us and the world, especially as children are growing up. If they don't have electronic devices, which from my own experience, I would encourage you not to let your kids have electronic devices as they're growing up. When it can change as they get into their teenage years, but when they're younger than that, from my experience, it's not something that you want to be doing. And so then a child's whole life is outdoors, is gardening, playing outside, or even if you're inside, it's a very different environment to living in town, having the TV going, being on your iPhone. It's a whole different idea. Growing up around God's creation and not man's is definitely a very positive thing. Not just for spiritual growth, but even for mental development. It's much better to be out in nature where we were meant to be instead of being highly stimulated by the world. And that was the last thing I wanted to mention was being in nature, being in the country is a very peaceful, soothing, quieting environment. And I don't know what parents there are out there that really want to wind up their little kids. Probably not many. Probably most parents want to calm their children down, keep them peaceful. And the country is such a good environment for that because, kids can go outside, they can use up all their energy. It's just a soothing, quieting, peaceful environment as opposed to all the stimulation and hustle and bustle and noise and just things happening all the time in the city. I'm sure that elevates the potential for noise in the home and for a lot of that. Where we live now, some days I go up and babysit some friends of ours who go to our church, and the kids are like 14, 12, and 6. And they spend all of their time outside, basically. The things they have had me do when I go there to babysit them, I always come home with stories like, guys, you won't believe what I did this time. I was not prepared for this. I need to remember to take, certain outfits and something when I go there. But it's good. I'm so happy to see them growing up outside in their recreation being climbing mountains that I can guarantee you if I took some of you there, you would think you were going to die. I kind of thought I was, but that's where they're growing up. That's what their life is. And it's so much better than the constant stimulation and artificial excitement of the city.
As Hannah said, we've both grown up in the country ever since Ireland. I was only in Ireland 1 year before we moved to America, but
Ireland was a country.
yeah, Ireland was one of the most countrified places we lived, I guess. But yeah, it's definitely been for me as a young boy growing up, definitely a great place to live. I think especially for young boys, country living is wonderful because of course young boys like to get out and they like to play and and stuff. But if you're in the city, that's hard. You might have your garden or your yard right there, but it's a lot better when you can be out in the country. I remember the house that we built, Dad was mentioning earlier. We had a huge big lawn. It was a couple acres of grass, and it was just great for me to you have that much space that you could just roam and do different things. Even where we are now, we have a fairly big yard and so forth, and it's wonderful. So I think definitely being outdoors, sledding in the wintertime, biking in the summer.
Do you remember on our yard and the other house in Montana, we had the Olympics? You remember that? We did javelin. We just found some branches in the woods and see who could throw them the furthest. And we did
14 meters.
Shot put. We measured out 100 meters. We had the Chariots of Fire music playing out of the stereo, as Caleb was running around the yard. It was so much fun.
So just all those different things. That house also, we had a lot of wildlife. We had moose, bear, deer, coyotes, wolf, everything you can pretty much think of that Montana would have. I guess probably more Northern California, but I'm sure here it has some of those animals as well. But
some of the moms might think that was a big disadvantage.
True.
Not an advantage. So you just put them all off, move into the country now.
Don't worry, we had bears on our deck, pawing on our front door. We were making breakfast, if that helps. But they were safe.
Personally, though, I prefer to have a bear pawing on my front door than a thief or somebody trying to get into my house. So I think that was my next section here. It was just a better influence being in the country. You might think, yes, bears, these things are dangerous, but they're in the control of God. People are in control of themselves. Yes, God is in control, but so is the devil. And of course, that is the case in animals too. They're not, they're not tame, but still, it's definitely a way better place. And I'm very glad that we were able to grow up in the country. As Hannah said, we didn't have electronic devices until we were older. I know that the former CEO of Apple, Steve Jobs, said that he would recommend, even for his own children, that they shouldn't have a device until the age of 12. Imagine if we implemented that into our homes. Not only not having a device, not using their parents' device. I was on an airplane, this was about this time last year, and I somehow how the seating worked, I'd end up booking the flight, and so I was in the very back of the plane. And as I was getting off, this other young gentleman commented to this single mother that was behind us who had this probably like 2 or 3 year old. And I was like, wow, you're such a good child. And she's like, yeah, thank the Lord for iPads. And I had observed it also that the kid was just pretty much playing nonsense video games, innocent video games, but just engrossed with his, with his mom's, iPad for the entire 2-hour flight. So yes, he was being a good kid, but all it was just a distraction from real life. So I'm very glad that we were able to grow up not only in a country setting, but in a country mindset. Of course, we weren't perfect, but it was definitely a benefit to be able to grow up there.
Yeah, many fond memories of. You remember the road to our house when the children were younger was quite steep. That actually became a little bit of a problem in winter. Just getting back home if we'd had a heavy snowfall. But once the road was all cleared, that road was just so much fun for sledding. I mean, it was like 3/4 of a mile long, and you got steep. We hit 34 mile an hour. 34 mile an hour feels fast on a bike, but 34 mile an hour when your rear end is this far from the ground, it seems fast. And it is fast. And that was in the dark, just with a head torch. That was even...
You might have hit 34, I never did.
Yeah,
You don't know.
I hit a lot of things going down that road. We had a few accidents, there's a few spills, but there's a way more positive memories than just living in the box of city living that the devil's got mapped out for everybody. So it didn't start out, I didn't have the privilege that Hannah and Caleb had. I'm so pleased that God gave me the opportunity as a dad to give them that. But I grew up in the city. My parents lived in suburbia. We were just, 5 minutes drive from the center of town. I didn't grow up as a Christian young boy. My parents were not Christian parents. We came into the faith later. So I lived in the country, in the city till I was married. As a boy growing up, my parents did a good job though. Even though we lived in a city, we went camping, 5-10 times every year. My parents had a little tiny, I'm talking, it was tiny by British standards, but by American standards, the little travel trailer that my parents had was 10 feet long and 7 feet wide. That's like where you guys are sat. And there was 5 of us, my parents and 3 kids. And it got a little bit, agitated sometimes, I can remember. But we had so much fun. We'd just fall out of the camper and play outside all day. So my parents did a good job of getting us out in the country. I was very sporty as a kid, so my parents took me. Some of you parents feel like a taxi service sometimes. My parents must have felt that way because I played soccer for one team on one day of the week and soccer for the school on another day of the week. And then I'd practice 2 times a week for each team. And then I probably wanted to do something else the other night because there's only one night left if you do the math. So it was very active, just running around the field all the time. And I credit today my good health on all that physical exercise when I was a kid. I wasn't sat on the sofa. I don't even remember my parents' sofa. They had a TV, I remember, but we weren't huge TV watchers. We were outside people. When I was 17, my dad got into hang gliding. I remember him and I went to the golf range and he said, "Paul, it's going to be golf or it's going to be hang gliding." And I remember even at that age thinking, well, that's pretty different. I mean, golf seems like what you do at the end of life, and hang gliding seems like that's what you do at the beginning of life if you survive. So anyway, he got into hang gliding and I would go with him. That's out in the country. Again, we'd drive out of the city, we'd go to the nearest mountain or hill, and we'd have to carry all the gear to the top of the hill. And so I'd carry some of my dad's gear, he'd carry it, and I'd help him set his hang glider up, and he would fly, and I'd stay on the ground taking pictures and helping other people. And that didn't last long. When I got to be 17, old enough to fly a hang glider, I took lessons, and I got into hang gliding. So now Dad and I are hang gliding. My poor mom. I don't know how she got through it, but she did. So I lived in the city. I went to public school in the city, but my parents always had us outside. I worked in the city, the 13th floor. I had a 45-minute commute. But it was, I was very thankful for the country life versus the artificial life. Have you ever noticed that if you go into Costco or Walmart, there's 2 things you don't see? I mean, you see lots of things. There's 2 things you don't see: a clock and a window. They just want you trapped in their little world. They don't want you seeing outside. They don't want you seeing what the time is. They just want you to listen to their mindless music and spend money. And a lot of us fall for it. But there's a whole different world out there. There really is. I'm not saying don't ever go to Costco or Walmart. We have to. But Caleb's going to tell us a bit more.
So Dad looked at city living living in the city with a city mindset. I want to talk about living in the country with a city mindset, because I think that's what a lot of times happens. Is yes, we want to move to the country, and maybe we do end up moving to the country. But then, as Dad was mentioning at the beginning of the message, a lot of the things that we had in the city just follow us straight to the country. And so, yes, we live on our 20 acres, but we may as well be living in our, half an acre on Main Street. So living in the country is a completely different mindset than living in the city. Whether that be, I know for us, it was, we didn't go to town every day to buy our groceries for that day. We would go, maybe every couple weeks to get our groceries. Fresh stuff can only last so long. But it's a whole different mindset. Instead of, being on social media and all those things all the time, we can be outdoors enjoying the nature. And it's just it's a whole different mentality, and we, as Hannah and I said earlier, not being on devices when we were young was a big benefit for that, because then we didn't even have email until we were like, I don't know, 14 or 15, which might now seem like, well, email is kind of extinct now anyway, but text
not for us, just for you guys.
Sorry. Text, email, all those types of things. But that means you become friends with the people that are around you, not the people that are in China and, Egypt and wherever else, completely different side of the world. Which is, as long as those, influences are wholesome influences, then it's definitely a benefit. Another benefit is the fresh air. Where we live now, you can just go outside and it's just quiet. It's just, the fresh air is just beautiful versus, say you're in the city, you got cars driving around, you got ambulances, maybe you're in the flight path, so you have a plane coming over every 45 seconds or whatever, and the train and whatever else. And yeah, we have a train, but it comes around about every hour, and it's by the time we've lived there 2 years now, and you hardly notice it. But it's just it's a lot more, as I would imagine, a wholesome environment that Christ would want to be in. I'm going to turn to, you don't have to turn there, but Mark 6 and verse 31. This is, Jesus said, and he said unto them, come yourselves apart into a desert place and rest a while. And it carries on. But now, of course, that's not saying we need to move to the Mojave. It's just meaning come to a quiet place, a place that is free from other distractions, free from the worldly distractions, just so that we can rest a while with him in nature. And yeah, there's way less worldly environment. It's way less of a worldly environment in the country. But those worldly influences can be brought in if we're on the, social media and the internet and all these different things. So we have to be very careful. It's not now, you could be hanging out with your friends over at the park or whatever, and that was a bad influence. Now it's, you're on your phone, and that can be a bad influence. It's a whole different ballpark, a harder ballpark in a sense. But it's still something that I think, even if we're in the country, that'll definitely help. But it's also something we need to make sure that we are aware of, and that we're, not using those in the wrong way. And just to touch on lastly, making sure that, in the city, it's a lot more of a dangerous, place to be in, especially for young kids. But out in the country, it's just so much freer, it's safer. One time, it was about this time last year, actually, I was in New York on work trip, and I got to go to Times Square. I'd never been to Times Square before, and I'd been wanting to go there for years after seeing pictures of it and different things. And it was a really cool experience. But after about 45 minutes to an hour of being there, I was just like, get me out of here. And I attribute that to the fact that I've grown up in the country. I haven't had those worldly, city environments as much. Of course, we travel a lot with the ministry, and so I've gotten maybe more a taste of, that than somebody who's just lived in the country their whole life. But still, as I said, after 45 minutes of being there, it was amazing to me how physical it was. Like, get me out of here. It was just like, even if I just went back a block or two, it was like, oh, so much better. I can breathe. So that I think shows that just living in the country for, I've lived in the country for 19 years, just living in the country for that amount of time has, even if, other things were in our lives, just the fact of living in the country will, put a certain mindset on you that you'll take into the rest of your life.
Amen.
So what if you live in the city right now and you can't get out of the city like by tomorrow? You can't necessarily go home from this retreat, sell your house on Monday, and move into your new house by Tuesday. It doesn't really work like that. Does that mean that life has to go on hold till you can get into the country? No, we can live with a country mindset even when we live in the city. Now, that doesn't mean that we can go away from this and say, oh, well, there's ways that I can live in the city, so I don't have to worry about trying to move out. We still want to aim towards it. But if it's not possible for you right now, you can still make the most of having a quiet, peaceful mindset where you are. It's possible for kids to grow up loving Jesus and undistracted by the world while still living in the city. We don't, our circumstances don't control us. We can choose to control them. We stayed at a house when we were speaking in downtown London a long time ago, and I remember this single mother. She lived in this apartment, like one of the higher floors in downtown London. It's as city as you can possibly get. She had no yard. I think she might have had a little bit of a balcony outside, but
She had no husband either.
yeah, so I said single mom.
Single mom. Okay.
But she had plants growing inside her apartment. She had little seedlings that she was helping her little girl plant, and I think they had fish, like
And a tortoise.
goldfish and a little turtle, and she had all these little country-like things inside her apartment that she was teaching her little girl how to garden. She was keeping her life as close to country as she possibly could while not being able to be in the country. You know, maybe you can't have a garden or a greenhouse, but you can do things indoors. You can grow plants indoors. You can teach children about things like, cooking and the little gardening things you can do, and how to take care of pets and things like that are as close to the country, wholesome, quiet life as you can get while still being in the city. Just because you live 5 minutes from Walmart doesn't mean you have to go there every day. It doesn't mean you have to go to the mall as soon as you want to do something. You can go to the park instead. You can do things like drive out of the city and take the time to go to a lake, or go to the park in the evenings and play on the swings. Do something like that is going to be outdoors. It may not be quite what you would do if you were in the country, but there's a lot that we can do in today's world that, unless we're living in the middle of LA, that may make it a little bit harder to find country, but even then, you can find a park. There's things that we can do to get out in nature. And if we live in, a little town, even if we live like in Sacramento or something, drive half an hour and go somewhere out in the country. You'd spend the gas driving to the mall every day anyway, so just skip the mall every day and go out to a park for a day. We can avoid those temptations to just do what's easy because it's close to us, and go and spend time in nature, go and do wholesome things. And, instead of just spending time on the TV, do something out in nature that can be a blessing to the family. So even if you live in the city, you can live in the city with a country mindset, and it can still be beneficial to your kids.
A classic example of this is, how many of you know the Santoyo family? Pee-wee and Dee Dee? Not many of you. They actually used to host the California family camp, as it was back then, before Mark and Liz took it over. And Caleb and I recently stayed with them in their home. They live, where do they live, Caleb? Santa something. Costa Mesa. So they're surrounded by, right where their home is, the interstate is like 150 yards away. And they've got a little single wide on a trailer park. And I tell you, that family is making it. They take every opportunity they have to get out into the country. They take their kids to the gym and do ninja stuff, and the parents go with them. They don't just send them off. And they're a very connected family, but they live 45 miles or 45 minutes from anything that you could call country. But it's working for them because they're making it work. They are an extraordinary family. I don't think many families would survive. I don't think I would survive living where they live. They have just made it their mind that, until God moves them, this is what they're going to do. And they didn't start off with a good startup. They both came from broken homes. They both got into trouble with the law, but it has worked for them. God will move them eventually, but they're kind of tied there because of their work at the moment. But they're of good courage. So that's not your out to stay where you are, unless you're prepared to call up Pee-wee and Dee Dee. And Dee Dee will tell you how it is. you'll move to the country rather than do what she tells you to do. If you're watching this, DD, we're still friends. Okay. Caleb and Restoration International has just put together an 18-minute documentary on the Santoyo family and their situation. It was due to be out a week or so ago, but we ran into some little tweaks that we wanted to do at the last minute. So it's going to be out next couple of weeks, next month. So watch for that on the Restoration International YouTube or the Restoration International website. Or if you're on Facebook, you shouldn't be, but if you are, then it'll be there as well. In your I'm on Facebook. In the 5 minutes a week that you're on Facebook, hopefully you'll see it there. Go to Restoration International. That's got you all talking, hasn't it? Here's another thing to guard against. And I'm doing Carolyn's part now. Carolyn would be, if she was here, she would tell you she had picked up the mindset that the further out you are, the better. That's not true. In fact, Carolyn would say, the further out you are, the more holy you are. So when we were looking at country homes, I was always tending a little bit closer because I'm thinking about practicalities like work and, getting to places. And Carolyn's thinking, oh, but, further out would be even better. We'd be further away from the world, and
2 hours from church.
Yeah, until we ended up 2 hours from church. That's not so smart. I mean, that turns into a very long day, breakfast and lunch in the car. So it's not the further away from civilization you are, the holier you are. That's not. The further you are away, the longer the commute. Yeah? And sometimes we think, oh, if I had 40 acres, that would be country. That's just an awful lot of grass to cut. That's what that is. So it doesn't have to be a big plot of land, and it doesn't have to be so far away that you can't get anywhere. Actually, one of the reasons that we moved back to Montana, because in Arizona, we were an hour and a half from town and 3 hours from the airport. 3.5 hours from the airport. And Hannah goes off to do a youth weekend, but she can't drive. So we have to take her to the airport, but she's going to fly at 6 in the morning, and we can't leave at, midnight. So we go down the afternoon before. So she's going out for the weekend, so we have to drive down to town, Thursday afternoon, stay in a hotel, take her to the airport, Friday morning, drive all the way back. That's most of Friday used up. And she goes off and she calls up, Sunday, okay, I'm on my way back. So we have to go back down to Phoenix. Stay the night. It just didn't work. I mean, now, it's just 45 minutes to the airport. That works a lot better. So you can be a long way out when you've got little children, but it doesn't work at this age. Where are they going to get work? I mean, how are they going to get to school if you're, out on the moon somewhere? It's gotta, you got to think about these things. And this is Carolyn speaking. I don't think she'd talk about it. Well, she'd say it different, sure. I think hopefully we're bringing out that I think science will eventually come to the conclusion that the more quiet and simple the life, the more free from artificial excitement, the better it will be for our health. They haven't come to that yet, but it was written down in Spirit of Prophecy, 100 years ago. So brothers and sisters, I encourage you, get out, get a garden, live the natural life. It's much more conducive to spiritual growth. So the last section we wanted to talk about is how do we get there? How do we get from the city to the country? Well, we could tell you some great stories. Everybody's story is different. I could tell you one family, they wanted to move to the country. It was their second marriage. They had a couple of teenagers. They were broke. I mean, flat broke. And they're just driving around looking for a country place to rent. And they came across, this is back east, they came across a country home, and they were amazed because the driveway had concrete pillars either side of the entrance, and on one concrete pillar was his initial, and on the other concrete pillar was her initial. They thought, this is our house. So they drive up the driveway and they meet the guy who owned it. He was just working on it. He wasn't living there. Nobody was living there. And they said, hey, we would like to live here. I mean, they were pretty bold. And he says, well, yeah, it's kind of between renters at the moment, but it's not really ready to be lived in. Anyway, they got talking and they said, we're Seventh-day Adventists. Oh, you're Seventh-day Adventists. Do you remember those Bible stories or something? They had a blue cover and there was like 10 of them and stuff. And they said, yeah, we know those. I really need a copy of those for I forget the reason. I've looked everywhere, eBay, everywhere I've looked, and I can't find. And they said, we could get you those. And they said, if you can get me those 10 Bible story books, you can live in this house. Isn't that a story? That's real people. I know them. And they lived in that house, and they didn't pay any rent. He worked on fixing the house up bit by bit, and that's how they lived out in the country. That was a few years ago, but we could tell you some other phenomenal stories, but it's different for everybody, and it's probably not going to be like that for you. You're probably not going to trade a set of used Bible story books for your country dream. Yeah, actually, the wife has now passed away, and so God was very good to them. But who knows anybody's future? So the first thing to do if we're going to go to the country is we got to get down on our knees, yeah? The second thing is we got to start living like we're in the country even though we're not. So it's not, one of the traps that a lot of people fall into is when we get to the country, we're going to do this and we're going to do that. And, when we move to the country, we're going to homeschool. Well, you can homeschool where you are, yeah? You don't need a country house. I mean, you're doing school inside, presumably, most of the time. So that can be inside the city or inside the country. So start living it where you are. Don't fall for the lie. Everything will be different when we go to the country. Things are different when you go to the country, but there's one thing that will follow you to the country. Yourself. Yeah? You'll still have the same irritations. In fact, country living is in some ways it's easier, but in other ways it's a lot harder. There's a bigger commute. There's more grass to cut. There's more work to do. But that's good in a way, because when you're working, devil makes work for idle hands. When you've got a lot to do, some of those things just fall off naturally. If you're going to move to the country, it's going to take effort. It's like getting a second job. It really is. So you've got your job now. If you want to move to the country, I'm telling you to get a second job. The second job is looking for your country home. It takes a lot of work. It's either the wife browsing wherever, and you've got to go out and look at it, and then you've got to save, and you've got to get your finances in order. It's work. It's work. It's not an easy thing, and it's... I hate to tell you guys here in California, but if you want to move to the country, you're probably going to have to move out of the state. Unless you have a whole bunch of money. But hey, leaving California wouldn't be too bad anyway, would it? There's a lot of people from California who live in Montana. It's a good move. So not too many of you do it, because then Montana won't be Montana. Montana is the 4th biggest state in the country. We just passed 1 million people. How many million in California? 38? 38 million. And we've only got one. Anyway, you can stay here if you want, but if I was you, I'd get out. And if you own a home, praise the Lord, you got to sell that home if you're going to move, unless you've got enough money to buy another place and you can rent out the old place or whatever. But that means you've got to put your house on the market. Isn't that scary? Actually put in a for sale sign out there. I suggest you can try for sale by owner, but I'd get a realtor involved if you want it to move reasonably quickly. Otherwise, you'll have your for sale sign out in the yard there, and you feel all good about it, but it isn't actually doing anything. You've got to actually be active about doing this. Mark and Liz, you have a great story as well. We haven't got time to get into that. Husbands, you've got to think about work. If you're going to move, what are you going to do for work? There's another story, I think, of a family that we've been talking to recently. They came to us at a family retreat, and they said, we got to get out. When they got married, they said, we're going to get out before we have children. The children came along, they still hadn't got out. Now they're starting to run into some troubles with the children and the children's associations, and it's like they rethought, we got to get out. And so they came to us, they got good educations, and he's got a good job, or I should say he's got a good paying job. And they said to us, we are ready to just ditch all of it. In fact, before they spoke to us, they said, my husband handed in his notice before he came to family retreat. He's got 30 days, and we don't know where we're going. And I admire, some things you have to move cautiously. You can't just go crazy. But these guys were so passionate about it, I knew God was going to take care of them. And he did. They got out to the country. They had some ups and downs with family. That's another whole topic that we can't necessarily get into. As you decide to move to the country, don't expect everybody to think, oh, good for you. That is just awesome. Most people are going to think, you're crazy. And your family is going to think you're deserting them. And you're being insubordinate. And, the big guilt trips will come. We've seen it over and over again. How can you take our grandchildren away from us? It's like, because they're our children, I'm just alerting you to some of the real things. The other thing is, if you tell some of your colleagues at work that are not Christian or Adventist you're moving to the country, they'll probably say, good for you. You tell your brothers and sisters at church you're moving to the country, they probably won't say good for you. And I've pondered this for years. Why is it? Because we all know we should be doing it. And when somebody goes, it kind of puts a little bit of a guilt trip on the people who are staying. And so it's kind of, do you think you really need to do that? Aren't you going to miss, and they drag you down. So you're going to have to be brave. You're going to have to go for it, and don't go without the Lord. You got to you got to plan your escape. Because that's what it is. Plan your escape. 1 year, none of this is in the notes. I've given up on the notes. And the time, sorry. We didn't start a clock. Let's see, when my wife's not here, you get us as we are without my wife's discipline organization. She's an organizer. 1 year, we went to the Washington family retreat. It was family camp meeting back then. And I met the family who I hadn't seen before. And I said, oh, it's good to see you guys. Have you been before? And they said, no, we went to the California family retreat. I said, you did? We didn't see you down there. Oh, yeah, we went there for years. It's like, okay, sorry about that. So you moved from California up to Washington. It was, Washington. And they said, yes, we did. And then I saw another family, and I thought, it really throws us off. Like if any of you were to show up at Indiana family retreat, I'd be looking at you thinking, I know you, don't I? But you don't fit here. It's like, it just does something to our brains. Here's somebody who travels as well, who knows it just messes you up. So I saw this family, and I'm thinking, boy, I know them. So anyway, I managed to get the conversation going without letting them know I didn't know who they were. You know how that works. And eventually I found out that they used to go to the California family retreat. And I thought, that's it. That's where I've seen you guys. But they'd moved to Washington. And this was the same year. 2 families. Actually, as that retreat went on, we found 5 families that had come to California family retreat when it was down at Camp Cedar Falls. That was even before Pine Springs. And 5 families, independent of each other, moved to Washington. Not all the same place, but it was all Eastern Washington. And they all came to the Washington family retreat, and they all met each other there. I was able to put them all together. What a neat experience. So Washington Family Retreat is July 4 through 8. So you've got like 2 weeks. See you there this year or next. We should close it up. But we just wanted to remind you again, please don't settle. Take your future and run with it. Don't be dictated to, this is where I'm planted and this is where I'm going to be. There's a lot more out there, folks. It says in Child Guidance that parenting is 10 times easier in the country. That would be enough to move any family, surely. 10 times easier. Let's do it. Or you can do it the hard way. But so we're going to have a bit of contemplation time now. Maybe you can have a bit of family contemplation time. Do we really want to do this? Are we up for this? I mean, or have we kind of started living in the country but adopting a city lifestyle? We've covered different angles. But maybe even in this little bit of contemplation time, there'll be a family that says, this is it, we're going to do it. That would be worth it all for us. So we're just going to sit down for just a couple of minutes. Maybe Hannah or Hendrix or somebody can play the piano and just talk amongst yourselves or just talk to the Lord. And in a couple of minutes, we'll come back up and I'll close with prayer. Just before we pray, I've got a couple of quotes that I missed out. I think it's probably appropriate, might be just a little bit of encouragement. This is from Country Living. It's on your phone. CL is the code. I could not sleep past 2 o'clock this morning. Obviously, woke up in the middle of the night. During the night season, I was in council. I was pleading with some families to avail themselves of God's appointed means and get away from the cities and save their children. Some were loitering, making no determined effort. This is the families she envisioned that she was encouraging to get out. And on page 9, in harmony with the light given me, I am urging people to come out of the great centers of population. Our cities are increasing in wickedness, and it is becoming more and more evident that those who remain in them unnecessarily do so at the peril of their soul's salvation. Ouch, that's not just health, that's salvation. So let's go to our knees and close in prayer. Father in heaven, I know that moving out of the city into the country is it's a huge step of faith, and it's not that straightforward. There's so many things to think about, home and finances and work, school. But Father, as we step into the unknown, there are so many blessings. I know it's just the sort of thing that once we've done it and we're there, we look back and say, man, why did we not do that sooner? Why did we loiter? But Father, I pray for anyone here who is under conviction that really it's time to get